Hi all, I have a fascinating encounter to show you between the current world chess champion Magnus Carlsen and Hikaru Nakamura. So they have a friendly rivalry, often some very funny messages on Twitter, banter between them. The score between Magnus Carlsen and Hikaru Nakamura is quite lopsided if you count only classical games. According to chessgames.com, if you do Carlsen versus Nakamura in the search box, you'll get the stat that Magnus Carlsen has beaten Nakamura 12-0 with 18 draws. However, if you include rapid or exhibition games, then the score is 21-6 with 28 draws. And if you make it only rapid or exhibition games, Magnus Carlsen has beaten Nakamura 9-6 with 10 draws. So a lot of people were forming the idea that Nakamura couldn't beat Carlsen at classical. He came very close, exceptionally close on occasion. In fact, one game he managed to find the only move which perhaps didn't win, which was particularly tragic. So was this going to be continuing this kind of lopsided result? Let's have a look at this game in the Bilbao Masters tournament. So the 9th Masters Final 2016. So Carlsen playing white kicks off with e4. We have a Sicilian defense. Now knight e2, a little bit surprising, but sometimes white might not be interested in playing d4. So there's a bit of flexibility, or rather not have the knight here, just to keep it on e2 sometimes. We have d6. And actually we go into a kind of dragon fianchetto variation. White does play d4 in fact now. Knight f6, both sides castle. And we have a double fianchetto attempt from Magnus. So we're going to fianchetto his other bishop. Knight c6. And you might find this a little odd. White does take on c6 here. Which of course it increases black's pawns in the centre. But there are some major benefits to be observed in this position. Sometimes the e5 break could be useful, but at the moment white has to be concerned about black playing knight takes e4, because you see this rook is kind of loose on this diagonal. We have bishop b2, which safeguards everything. On knight takes e4, then we have bishop takes e4, there's no problem. But with black's next move, queen a5, in fact, knight takes e4 is now threatened with the idea of bishop takes c3 after. White parries this with knight a4. Okay, so if white's given another turn, there are some interesting ideas with the queen on a5, like queen e1, or maybe even a quick e5 and then followed by queen e1, just to incur some structural damage on black's position and extend the scope of this bishop. Black doesn't give white too much of a chance to use these ideas. The next move is forcing bishop g4. f3, the bishop could just go back and job done. The diagonal's been weakened and black stands quite well here. But we have queen e1 hitting the queen, and this e5 break mentioned before could be worrisome for black. The queen goes to h5, keeping an eye on things like h3 and may be able to swap off to try and cause some light square weaknesses in white's camp here. f3, bishop h3. Now g4, the queen has to hold on to the bishop here, and there's only h6, and this is, you might consider this quite a frightening position, this position here. It turns out that tactically it seems this awkward configuration cannot be exploited so easily. Magnus plays rook d1. You might ask, what about bishop c1? And if g5, why can't we play this to try and win a pawn? Well, the thing is, this position here isn't so clear after knight h5 with the knight. It's going to be entrenched on f4. Black would have very good compensation. And note also the tempo gain here. So we have a position like this where black wouldn't mind this really at all. He can clamp down on h4 from white, perhaps use the g file, and that seems to be very good compensation for black there. So this idea of playing bishop c1 isn't entirely attractive just to win a pawn there. White has weakened himself on the dark squares quite a bit. So a very, very interesting position for this rook ad1 being played. Okay, we have g5 now in advance, because it is starting to get a little bit dangerous with bishop c1, with the idea of actually queen e3. If black's not prepared for bishop c1 now, then queen e3 is going to be quite tricky. So black does prepare for bishop c1, and it is played. Now bishop takes g2, king takes, queen g6, preparing for things like queen d2 or queen e3. Black could then play h6, for example. But the g5 pawn isn't left alone now. It's attacked again. G takes, queen takes. So structurally, you might think this is quite pleasant, that white has actually isolated the h pawn, maybe have this h file. And perhaps Magnus is getting a little bit optimistic. Black's next move seemed logical to counter in the center with d5. The pawn cannot really go to e5 because then knight d7 with a vengeance is not so nice, this position, because also the queen's hitting c2 here. So perhaps best though would have been to play e takes, which looks a little bit maybe dull, but queen takes c2 is not a problem here after queen g5. This position here isn't so problematic, because if the queen goes back, we can play knight b6 and then g5, and this should be okay for white because he's going to be picking up that pawn. So that was actually possible to play e takes d5, maybe a bit on the dull side you might think, but with in conjunction with the knight on a4, it kind of makes sense that the d5 pawn is a potential target here for e takes d5 to be useful to kind of try and weaken it. And you've also got g5 on this side of the board as well, so they all seem to be working well for the d5 pawn on e takes. But now we see instead a controversial decision for Magnus. Many would think this is controversial. g5, it represents basically a pawn sacrifice. The pawn is pinned to white's king, of course, so black is actually just winning a pawn here. Of course these pawns are doubled, and it looks a little bit scary that now after f4, because if f takes, black can just play knight takes and then maybe f5 to support the knight if needed. So this is really a pawn sack now. If white's given another move, it would be pretty bad for black if f5 was allowed, but this is stopped. So where is the compensation? We have c4 depriving the knight of the d5 square. Perhaps Magnus is keen to exchange off the bishops and kind of use this h file. We have black trying to contest the center file, that d file. And now knight e8, which gives the idea that knight d6 to f5 would be very useful. And midway it will be protecting the pawn. After knight c5 that does hit e4, so that's protected as well as part of this maneuver. And in fact f5 is also useful. Queen f2, in fact f5 is the one chosen just to hold firmly the e4 pawn. The thing is with this position now is that once black gets e5 and knocks out this pawn, he'll have some central pawn mobility evolving in the position and is weakening white's king. White's king is a little bit fragile here. We see bishop b2, knight f7 with the idea potentially e5 is coming up. Notice the pressure on e5 and g5 building up, and this g file with the king sitting there does not bode well. But Magnus does exchange off black's defensive fianchetto bishop and tries to tap into those dark square weaknesses. With queen g3 there's an idea queen c3 check could be handy. Now rook d6, this is dual purpose, not just for the d file, but potentially if e5, the rook could gravitate towards the g file via g6. We have rook d1, rook ad8, rook takes, so a couple of rooks coming off, and now this check. But is it dangerous? Isn't black still potentially playing e5 in this position? Rook f2 is played, and now here actually we have queen h5, And if black was given another move, then rook d1 would be really dangerous with coordination on h1. We have queen h3, queen d1, and this is a very, very interesting position, and black's really in good shape here, and you can see that from these variations. Here queen e3 was played. If queen g3, black is just in really, really good shape with things like e3 and rook d2. So this is just too dangerous for white. So we have queen e3. Now this e5 is played, so the extra pawn in the center is starting to make itself felt. This will be a big protected pass pawn soon. So we have queen g3 now. Okay, and now here rook g6. Yeah, there's pressure mounting on undermining the whole structure. This little bit of structure is under fierce attack. Both g5 and f4. It's crumbling. White is crumbling here. E takes, queen takes, check, and the g5 pawn is going next. Yes, rook takes g5 is quite good, but rook g2, there might be a bit of fight for white. So black would preferably take with the knight actually, because then there's things like knight f3. But first, approaching move 40, just maybe go past the time control to get the extra time. That's usual time there after move 40. Now we've passed move 40, black can spend more time and makes the decision knight takes g5. So there's a lethal idea of knight h3 check, forking king queen. Knight f3 check is also dangerous. It looks pretty bad. Can Nakamura mess this position up? Let's see. Check. Check. Is it going to be perpetual? Can black get out of the situation where this queen can reverberate and potentially cause a big nuisance? We have black now checking, and now queen d4, with the idea potentially if this knight was unpinned, it's controlling the diagonal, so there's king g7 to unpin would be dangerous for knight f3, for example. Also, of course, the knight's hit here. We have b4, and now there is a way found to get out of the perpetual attacks. Nakamura plays king g7. He's going to tuck his king potentially on h8. So not only is a pawn up, the king safety of white is under question now, and the checks are running out, and running out quickly in this position. Check, rook g8, and where is the next check? We have queen takes f5, but alas now knight f3 check. This is really crushing. If rook takes, then there's things like queen g1 check in this position, and just embarrassingly mating the world champion. Yeah, it's over really. Queen d6 is the killer final move. Threatening queen h2 check here, as well as queen h6. That could be handy as well. So if rook g2 trying to handle g3 and h2, then queen h6 is mating. After queen h5, queen takes h5 would be mate. So actually, this is the final move in the position, in the game. Queen d6, and Magnus resigns. And it's an astonishing achievement, really, actually, because it's such a lopsided record. People are starting to think, stylistically, there's something up between, in long time controls, that Carlsen was kind of Superman's kryptonite, that Nakamura couldn't do anything when he's playing against Carlsen because of the style in some way, that he couldn't get an active game. But it showed in this game Magnus maybe overextended, and it seems to be in retrospect an unsound pawn sack. In reality, it was incredible resourcefulness to make sure that white was running out of checks and to actually exploit this potential king safety issues of white. So congratulations to Nakamura, and it also I believe he now moves into rank 2 on the world ratings list. So a great day for Nakamura fans, and I have to say I am actually one of them. And although Nakamura may be doing too much banter when he's online or too emotional, in real life I've played him in Blitz and also online. I played him at Gibraltar, Clayton Hotel. It was great fun. He is always willing to play even the bunnies at Blitz. I think he's one of the most down-to-earth super grandmasters going, personally. And I've always thought that. Okay, comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.